What's good? This is your boy Tico Tren. Let me hit this branding real quick.
This channel is for mature audiences only. If you're underage on this channel, your parents' mom should have swallowed them or spit them out.
What's good? This is your boy Tico Tren, and this is going to be the this is basically subscribers request Date-Cation part 3, and I'm going to talk about I'm going to answer questions. It's going to be Q&A. Plus, I'm going to add something that I forgot to add to the last two, which was I actually said it in the last night's Baron and Sadis running into the we ran off into like actual live stream called Midnight Club. Um, midnight midnight what's it no Midnight Club Tico attrition basically, where I talked about North Korean women. North Korean women are I was talking about North Korean women in that one because I kind of sort of left them out. No, I didn't really leave them out, but I kind of sort of left them out in the discussion for all intents and purposes, where I was saying that um, if you have to pick any woman in the world that you want to date and have a long term relationship with, it's going to be North Korean women for this reason. All right, cool. However, the downside to that is if you know anything about me, I usually say something to the extent of if you meet her there, keep her there. Question is, do you want to live in North Korea? That being said, continue on. But yeah, this is going to be the Q&A version. This is going to be the Q&A version of the Date-Cations. Um, Feel free to ask me questions about anything and everything as far as like as long as far as like daycations and like sexcations, staycations and stuff like that, and just meeting people and meeting girls basically in other countries for all intents and purposes. Feel free to ask me questions. So basically, this is the Q&A version of it, and I already done added the my 2 cents about the North Korean women. They're probably the best women to date in the whole entire world. The question is, though, do you want to live in North Korea? That's the overall question. The thing about North Korean women, I can say, is they typically wear less makeup. They wear little to no makeup. When it comes to North Korean women, wear little to no makeup. The only time a North Korean woman wears makeup, unless she's in like the service industry, and she has to be like at a hotel or at a bar or a airline or something along the lines of that. She has to work for an airline. That's typically the only time North Korean women wear makeup. And North Korea is actually a very lovely country when you actually go to it. I mean, granted, it has its moments and it has its things, but it's typically a very nice country to go visit, especially if you're going to go skiing and stuff like that at the ski resort. The ski resort's very lovely. Um, yeah, so typically, yeah, if you're going to go and visit people if you're going to go visit if you're going to go and travel, I would say definitely check out North Korea and check out the ski resort and definitely check out various other places in North Korea too. On top of that, um, it's a very it's a very interesting place to definitely go. It has its moments. Don't get me wrong. It's not as bad as everybody makes it out to be. There are things that you're not allowed to take pictures of. There are things that you're allowed to take pictures of, and it's basically one of those things. It's basically it'd be no different than like if you were to go to a museum where like you're not allowed to take no cameras in here, this that and the other, this that and the other type thing. It's basically like parts of North Korea are the same way for all intents and purposes. No video cameras, and I mean no video cameras, I mean, you're allowed video cameras, but you're not allowed to take video of certain things, or you're not allowed to take pictures of certain things. So it's also about being respectful to their culture for all intents and purposes. Even if you don't like it, just be respectful because we don't want to hear that your ass went to jail for something being stupid. Basically, follow the rules like you would if you were to go to a hotel. I mean, a museum where they say leave your cameras outside, no cameras at all, basically. And there's a lot of museums in the United States that actually have that rule. And there are people that break that rule and they end up in jail. But it is what it is. But yeah, feel free to ask any questions, Joe. And anybody else that's watching, go ask questions as well too. So whoever else is watching in the background, go ask questions as well. Let's see here. Nobody has any questions, really, guys? Really? This is here we go. Okay. All right, I'll give you my email. My email. No, no. When it comes to emails, my email is. Here goes my email right here. There you go. That's my email. Um, and your question was the country with. See you. Based on okay, how you look. Okay, I see. Country with the best girls. The best girls. I would say I would have to give it up to Russia, um, Colombia, Brazil, and Germany, depending on what you like. Um, and I'm gonna have to go with probably nah. Those ones most definitely would be my favorite. My picks for best countries. Girls with the Brazil. I said Brazil. Did I say Brazil? Brazil. Um, yeah, that would probably be my best choices for all intents purposes. Best safest choices for all intents purposes. I would say Germany, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, places like that. Okay, that's what's up. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say either you were in Florida or you were in California with those pictures. Yeah, I'm gonna say you either in Florida or California with those pictures. So yeah, you would be good. You would be good in I would say Germany, um, Germany, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, Cuba, Canada, Germany, and Russia. Most definitely. Especially if you roll around looking like a pimp. Like that. Looking like a pimp. Yeah, definitely. At all the countries I name, if I had to pick one, the easiest one, I would say, the easiest one, spending the least amount of money, is, I would say, and spending the least amount of money, I would say, probably either Germany. It's a toss up between Germany and I would say Venezuela would probably be the easiest, and spending while spending the least amount of money. Um, you may have to spend a little extra, couple extra dollars. You may have to spend a couple extra dollars for Colombia. Uh, Costa Rica is also a good place for you. Definitely a good place for you to check out. Um, Places like that, Costa Rica and stuff like that. Um, but I would say if I had to rank them in order, the easiest to the hardest, I would say what I would say for the easiest, I would say Germany. Venezuela are the easiest. Colombia and Brazil are the second easiest. I would say then I would say Russia. Well, Russia would be last because you might have to spend a couple extra dollars for them chicks. So I would say them. I would make them dead last for the fact that it's easy, but you'll have to probably spend a couple extra dollars. Is typically how that works. But it's one of those things where it's like the trade-off is worth it. Belarus would be a much easier country for you to do that. Um, Much easier than yeah. Costa Rica. 70% of Costa Ricans actually speak English, like myself. Um, 70% of Costa Ricans speak English, especially if you hang out in San Jose, Jocko, and a few other places. They speak perfectly good English, and they tend to be like the more touristy destinations. Another part of Costa Rica where they speak English, and it's typically mainly Jamaicans, is the Lemon District. So anything in Lemon, is they speak English. Pretty much is the best way I can actually describe that to you. You may have to test it out yourself, but I think being you and how you are in this picture, I think you can pretty much make it in those countries. And for Prime Roller, aka Corey Steele, um, he doesn't come to this stream, so you're in the wrong stream for this. You're gonna yell at him. You might want to pick somebody else's stream to yell at him in, because he doesn't typically come to my streams. Um, so you're in the wrong stream yelling like this and cussing him out. Just the FYI. Yeah, Costa Rica's a nice mix. Costa Rica's a nice melting pot. Um, it's a very nice melting pot. There's a lot of women from there's everybody from a lot of walks of life live in Costa Rica. There's Afro Latinos, there's Jamaican Latinos, there's Asian Latinos, there's indigenous Latinos. They're basically all under one flag for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where it's like you're going to get in where you're definitely going to get in. They have Arabs, they have Asians, they have Indians, they pretty much have everybody from every walk of life for all intents and purposes. As a matter of fact, one of their presidents were Japanese, I think. Was Japanese I think he had Japanese heritage. Um, I could be wrong. Was he Chinese or Korean? I can't remember off the top of my head, but typically what happens with that is yeah, they'll be very accepting of you. You'll be fine in Costa Rica. Um, um, if you mainly stay in San Jose, yeah, because that tends to be the touristy destinations, and a lot of women tend to hang around the touristy destinations like that for this reason. And it's not very hard. Um, and most times you don't even really have to. A lot of times it's like if you're just there, you're there basically. And a lot of times you might have to have a little bit of game, and sometimes you don't really have to have too much game. And a lot of times if you're sitting there at the bar and you talk to the bartender, you tip her enough money. I'm just saying. She's very interested in you, quote unquote. um, but not all bartenders are like that. I can say that, but like there's certain bartenders you can usually tell the difference in their mannerisms if they're okay or not for all intents and purposes. Um, for all intents and purposes, yeah. Any other questions? It's not hard. I mean, it's not hard. You just got to be in the touristy destinations, and you'll pretty much be okay. I would say, but I would say Costa Rica probably fall third or fourth on the third. I would say third on the list, basically, for places to check out for Asian guys. Um, um, because typically, well, it's all about pop culture for all intents and purposes. The best way I can actually, it's all about pop culture. That's the best way I can actually describe it to you. It all comes down to pop culture. This is typically why a lot of things are hot and a lot of things aren't hot. A lot of things are cool and a lot of things aren't cool. It all comes down to pop culture and how and usually they tend to take cues from America. The world tends to take cues from America. So what they say is in or what they say is hot is typically how they do a lot of this stuff. Um, is pretty much how that works. So a lot of times, certain countries, Asians won't be hot. Certain countries, they will be hot. And then there's certain things that happen, like a Jet Li movie or a Jackie Chan movie or a Bruce Lee movie or a Donnie Yen movie or Chow Yun Fat movie, and basically now all of a sudden they're hot for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that works. Um, Oh, another good one is the one Asian guy that played in what's the name of that movie? That movie franchise. Oh my god. It slipped my mind. Oh my god. Oh my god. What the fuck was it? He played Chow in the Hangover movies. Typically it all comes down to pop culture. So it's all about what's hot in Hollywood at that moment in time for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that works. So there's irony to it with people like characters like Chow, characters like characters like Donnie Yen, and people like Donnie Yen and Chow basically made it much more hot for made it much more hot for Asian guys basically. Um, because you kind of figure you got like the badass cool calm and collective character in Donnie Yen when he played Ip Man and a few other characters. Then you got over here, you got Chow over here, just on a whole nother level of cockiness. Talk about what's up, bitches? You know, So it's like his centricness and his attitude and way he carried himself actually propelled a lot of Asian men into like the spotlight for women to want to date. The neat thing about it, is also a good place for Russia is also a good place for Asian men to go as well. It's typically how that works. Yeah, that's typically how that works. So another good place for Asian men to check out definitely is another good place for Asian men to check out most definitely is Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, places like that. Yeah, it does. It definitely does. Because the neat thing about it, what I remember when there was a rush to Sweden for black people, and there was a rush to Sweden for black people, and Africans actually went, but they were more or less talking about African Americans, not Africans. So a lot of African Americans actually have a lot of success with getting women in Sweden for this reason, especially Germany, because people think, oh, what are they like black men? I'm going. Then come to find out, no, they like a certain group of black men. They like the African American black men, and it's fun. It's the funniest thing watching all these people do this stupid shit on a regular basis, and I've always found it funny how it actually works and how it actually pans out. Um, yeah, but and the sad part about that, exoticness actually makes stuff more attractive for various reasons. And the irony to that is the irony to it is what a lot of people don't realize or know about a lot of these people is what a lot of people don't know is like a lot of these countries, a lot of these countries typically a lot of these countries they typically make it makes for a it makes for a very interesting it makes for a very interesting time, and it makes, especially if you're exotic for all intents purposes, it makes for a very good time if you're an exotic for all intents purposes when it comes to certain countries. Um, because there's a niche for exotic people in every single country for all intents purposes. There's a niche for everyone in every country. It all depends on which portion of the country you're actually in and what you got going on for yourself at the time. It's typically how that works. So it's one of those things where you basically have to you basically have to you basically have to like just get in, like, because there are a lot of these countries that I'm talking about and a lot of the countries that I'm leaving out. Typically if you go there yourself and experience it yourself, you can actually get a better feel for it yourself. But a lot of the countries I'm actually telling you are your best bets to actually for you to actually go and like for a datecation or for a sexcation for all intents purposes. Being who you are, it's the best places to go for all intents purposes. So yeah, that's pretty much how that works. um any more questions? Okay, here we go. Another question right here. Let's see. It's much easier, even with the even with the sexual liberation of women, and you can be able to get sex from anybody and everybody in America. It's much easier to do it while you're traveling because you're seen as an exotic, and you're also seen as an aphrodisiac for the fact that you're from another country and you were able to travel to this country and hang out and visit and for all intents and purposes. So you're typically seen as a better catch for all intents and purposes for the fact that you can actually travel, which is actually kind of sad once you think about it. But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if you can fit the mold or fit the thing, do it. It's typically how it is. So it's much easy. A lot of times it's a lot easier to leave the country to get booty than it is to actually stay in the country to get booty. Despite the fact that a lot of women are basically just giving it up all over the damn place. You got all the women complaining that men don't want to settle down in America. Meanwhile, they're too busy over here smashing all the hoes and all the women that are just giving it up for free who want to live their sexual liberation truth for all intents and purposes. So typically what happens with that is um yeah, it is easier to get hotter girls in other countries, most definitely. It's much easier to get hotter girls in other countries because the sad part about that, the baseline for hot in other countries and the baseline for hot here are two totally different hots. Like I would say like a New York 10 or a New York or a Beverly Hills 10 ends up being like a Russian 5, um, Russian 4 or 5 basically, or a Colombian 3 or 4, or a Costa Rican 4, or a Venezuelan 4, or a Cuban 3, or a yeah, for all intents and purposes, or a Belarus 3, or a Ukrainian 3 or 4. So yeah, like depending on what your scale of 1 to 10 is, and what you're used to and what you're not used to. Like typically, the sad part about that, a lot of the women in these other countries look a lot better than all your movie stars in America. So like the baseline to actually get in, the baseline for beauty in these countries are like far like a good example. A 3 in all these countries ends up being like a 9 or an 8 or 9, 8, 9 or 10, depending on where you are in each. Like if you're in California, I would say a 3 in what Belarus would end up being like a fucking 9 in America. A It's like yeah, it's like their version of ugly and your version of ugly is two totally different uglies. When it comes down to it, for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where it's like it's sad, and a good example of that is the best way I can preference that is it's sad when it's sad when you when when a fat chick from Belarus looks hotter than the hottest chick from America. If that's the best way I could actually put it to you. Like when a a thick girl from Belarus looks better than an American girl altogether. That's typically how it works. And the sad part about that, the look scale is totally different there. So like like the jump off point in America is what like 8, 9s, and 10s, whereas the jump off where a lot of women from America won't even make it past the threshold of a four basically in a lot of these countries. So like all these 10s in America end up being 4s in those countries, if you know what I mean. 3s or 4s in those countries for all intents and purposes. So the hottest chick that you could think of that's an American woman is only like a 3 or 4 in those countries. It's typically how it works. Or they're average. They're either average or a 3 or 4 basically. So the sad part about that, if that's really your game and you want to like settle down with one of them, you can end up with a better looking woman than any woman in the United States for all intents and purposes. For this reason, the only thing I would say about that is if you're going to go to Russia and you want a hot chick, you're going to have to endure a lot of the stupidity of like your money's our money and my money's my money. If you go to Russia, Belarus, you'll have a better time. You'll have a better time of actually getting around that in Belarus. In Ukraine, it's about the same as Russia when it comes to that. If you're going to actually settle down and actually want to make a family out of that chick for all intents and purposes, it's going to be about the same as Russia. Your money's our money, my money's my money type thing. Um, but Belarus is a lot easier. Germany, you're more likely to be worked with in Germany. Like she's more likely to share the wealth for all intents and purposes in Germany if you actually meet a German girl. Um, it's one of those things where like her money it's basically our money at that point if you're actually going to go into a serious relationship in Germany. Um, Colombian women, it depends on where you go. If you go near the if you go near the city, you'll typically get a lot of the women that are easier to get for all intents and purposes. However, I will say this: if you actually go if you actually go if you actually learn some Spanish, you'll get more women will open up to you in a lot of the Latin American countries. If you learn Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese, your option of women open up drastically. One thing I can say about like the only difference between Colombia and Brazil is it opens up if you learn their language, yes. However, in Colombia, if you actually have a place of residence in Colombia, your market opens up greatly. So if you have like if you speak the language, or if you have a place of residence in Colombia, your options will open up greatly. Because women take you much more serious because you're just not coming there for this, that, and the other for all intents and purposes. And typically, when you have a residence in Colombia, women tend to look at you a bit differently because they tend to see you around a lot more or something like that. Or on better average, they see you around more, so they typically start looking at you quite possibly for a long term relationship. Because truth be told, a lot of times Colombian women like to stay in their own country. A lot of times, you get some that will want to leave their country, but majority of them, a good portion of them will like to stay in their country because they're very family oriented, and they typically don't want to leave family behind, and they don't want to go somewhere where where they don't really know people, or they got to start all over again if they have a good support network where they are now. Because typically, if they get to where they're going, they typically don't have a good support network. Now, we'll say this: Venezuelan women are more likely to jump ship and come to another country than a Colombian woman. Um, Colombian women are always on the fence about leaving. If you're one of them guys that want to take her back to your place, I mean, take her back to your home, you might be up for a little bit of a fight taking her back home, basically, because she might not want to go, or she might end up on a fence for all intents and purposes. Um, Corey Still, everybody in here drinks wine. Your point. Anyways, I got pictures of me online drinking wine with a burger. Like, you're not the only one that drinks wine. um, what's up, Baron Yam? But yeah, you can typically get good looking women. Because the sad part about that, your definition of hot in America and their definition of hot in other countries are two totally different hots. It's basically like the best way I can describe it to you is think of it like this. There's three scales. There's three scales of 1 to 10. You got the ugly 1 to 10, you got the medium 1 to 10, and you got the hot 1 to 10. Typically, a lot of these countries are going to be the hot 1 to 10. America is going to be the medium 1 to 10, and also the okay ugly 1 to 10 for all intents and purposes. That's typically how that works. That's the best way I can describe it to you. So Russia would be the hot 1 to 10. America would be the average 1 to 10. It's typically how that works. So the hottest chick in America is basically still on the average scale of 1 to 10. Um, is the best way I can describe it to you. Um, all right. Jump up and move on a whim. Um, I would say for you, Baron Yam, I would say probably Montana. Minnesota is pretty much going through their restructuring after all the riots and shit like that. So I would say Montana at this point in time, Montana, any almost any state on the eastern side of the United States that borders to Canada, basically, except for Minnesota, right now, except for Minnesota. Like that borders Canada as far as like a body of water or by land for all intents and purposes. I would say would be your best bet to get up and go. It would be your best bet for get up and go and starting all over and going on a whim. Minnesota is currently not looking too hot right now, but it's starting to get better. But it's not really looking all that hot. Um, well, I would say, let me rephrase that. Minneapolis, and I would say Minneapolis is not the great place to be right now. St. Paul's would be better for you to go if you're going to go to Minnesota. Anything not Minneapolis would be a best would be a good spot for you to go for all intents and purposes. Yeah, the sad part about that is when it comes down to it, because what's the best way I can describe it to you? A lot of these countries don't really have the same. A lot of these countries really don't have the same outlook on partnering that America does. Because America basically is one of those countries where, like, instant gratification on demand for all intents and purposes. So typically you would rank a lot higher going to a lot of these other countries for this reason. Especially being that you're from America, you will rank a lot higher being the fact that you're from America and you're not from those countries. Typically Americans rank pretty high on a list in a lot of these countries for the fact that a lot of women want to go to these countries. A lot of women want to date somebody from these countries, or a lot of women actually, like, there's like good example that Colombian women. Colombian women will date an American for the fact that just in case shit happens in their country where like shit falls apart or turmoil, they have dual citizenship. It's simply how it works. But the irony to it, a lot of these countries, a lot of the women tend to stay within their country, hoping that shit doesn't go south basically in their country. So typically, if they marry a man from another country, they have the option to actually get out. They have the option to get out and actually move to another country and be safe. It's typically how it works. So what happens with that is a lot of women, believe it or not, actually date a lot of these men and stay in their countries. And a lot of women date men and they stay in these countries. They stay in their own country just in case, basically, and they get dual citizenship just in case shit happens with their country, let it be political fallout or turmoil or civil war or anything like that. For all intents and purposes, they have an out basically, um, and that's typically how a lot of that stuff works. Um, Now there are some women that be willing to jump ship in a heartbeat. Typically, I would say dodge those women unless you just want to have fun with them. Dodge those women if you want to get into a relationship with them, which I really don't suggest. But if you do, dodge those women for all intents and purposes, if that's what you're going to do. Um, Another good thing is, yeah, like I said, the fact that you're from America, you'll rank a lot higher in a lot of those countries for the fact that you look like you dress nice and you look like you got your pimp game going on there. All you need is a little pimp cup in that one picture. Turn that one cup, turn that bottle into a pimp cup, and you be straight. Turn that plastic cup into a pimp cup, you good. Walking around with little John chalice and shit. No, I'm just joking. Don't do all that. Don't do all that. Yeah, but you definitely look like you got some swag on you, though, pimping. You look like you got some swag on you. So you definitely will rank pretty high for the fact that you look like you got some serious swag going with you, my dude. Yeah. Hey, sometimes all you got the sad part about that, sometimes all you gotta do is go other places to avoid all these stuck up bitches. And the sad part about that, all these stuck up bitches end up being less attractive than the women in other countries. Sadly. Because a lot of the times what a lot of people fail to realize when it comes to like the Western world, when it comes to like America, and it comes to your UKs and stuff like that, and like, your Canadas and stuff like that, typically it's one of those things where like all these women got instant gratification, so they're going to be like thinking that they're going to be like a bunch of threes running around thinking that they're tens and shit, or a bunch of twos running around thinking they're nines and shit. So it's one of those things where like they've outkicked their coverage. They didn't outkick their coverage. They're basically trying to make their coverage seem like it's bigger than what it really is. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, this bitch is like, voice stream, voice stream before it got bought out by T-Mobile and shit like that. So she's only good in certain areas. It's typically how a lot of this shit works. Uh, um, it's typically how that works. So yeah, and it's typically one of those things where like, you just basically just roll in, be yourself, and like you look like you got some swag, look like you can holler at a few people, especially that one chick standing next to you. Well, that's two different chicks now that I think about it. Yeah. Well, that one looks like the younger one looks hot. I will give you that. The younger one that you took a picture with looks hot. The other one looks a little older, like she might be somebody's mom or something like that. But she's all hugged up on you. She's all hugged up on you. So obviously you got some swag for her to be hugged up on you. And she's married. And she's married. And so obviously you got some swag. Because she got a wedding ring on that finger right there. I see that shit. Yeah, but yeah, like fours, threes, twos, and ones will rate themselves as tens or think they're tens or think they deserve tens, basically, when in fact they don't. The sad part about that is what I've noticed about a lot of these other countries is women rank themselves accordingly. Um, they rank themselves based on their market value on how eligible they are to actually be snapped up by a suitor. So it's one of those things where like a lot of these countries, women have reality checks for the fact that, like, a good example of that is China. The reason why there's a bunch of leftover women, despite the fact that there's more Asian men than are Asian women in China. There's more Chinese men than Chinese women in China. Is for the fact that the Chinese culture, typically, if you hit a certain age, and you're not married by a certain age, or if you were married and divorced in China, you typically are considered leftover women or not desirable women. It's typically how that works. So China actually China went about it in the right way when it comes down to it. China did their due diligence to keep people in check when it comes down to it, because now a lot of these leftover women or a lot of these married and divorced women, they're looking towards like Western men to actually snap them up and marry them for all intents and purposes, or even remotely put them in a relation, like wife them up or put them or relationship them. Basically, is typically how it works. For the fact that, despite the fact that Chinese women can't really be as cocky as they want to be, for the fact that their men actually literally their society and how their society set up and how their men are, they basically put them in their place and let them know that you're not desirable anymore because you were married. Unlike in America, where back in the day, if you were a married woman, you got a divorce, you were a single woman. It's typically how that works. Or if you hit a certain age, nobody was simping for your ass. Basically, is pretty much what it is. And this is typically one of those things where a lot of people don't understand or realize this when you go to a lot of these countries, where a lot of them they actually have their society and their way of life actually keeps a lot of the women in check. Like a good example, what keeps women in check in like countries like Belarus and Russia and Ukraine is the fact that there's more women than men. There's a shit ton more women than men in Belarus, Russia, and all these other countries, to the point where there's not enough men to go around for women. So typically they literally have to compete or either learn their place in society for all intents and purposes for that fact. So there's a lot of women competing, and there's a lot of women that says, you know what, I'm not going to do that, because it's like I think it's like one to eight, 1 to 9, or 1 to 10. Uh, for every one man, there's 10 women basically. In Russia and Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus or something like that. It fluctuates somewhere between 1 in 7 and 1 in 10, basically, in those countries. So the sad part about that is a lot of those Russian women, a lot of those Ukrainian women, a lot of those Belarus women, and even I left out another country. I mentioned it in the last one, but I just remembered it now and I just forgot it. Holy shit! It was a part of the Estonia. Estonia. Estonia is even a good place to go check out as well too. Um, Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, you're not a bad looking guy at all. You look like you got your shit together. And you don't look like some of these other motherfuckers on here crying about not being able to get a woman and crying about all this other extra shit. It's basically like you're basically like you know what you want, you know what you like, and you got yourself together. Now you're trying to figure out where you go to actually, you know, you know, spread your wings or flaunt basically for all intents and purposes. And it's typically what it is. Like a lot of men will pretty much be like, well, I'm ugly and I'm this, that, and the other, and I'll never make it anywhere, and nobody likes me, and this, that, and the other. Or they'll come up with some crazy ass excuse like, well, if you can't make it in America, you can't make it anywhere. No, there's a big difference. There's a fucking big difference. There's a difference between dealing with a bunch of ain't shit bitches and dealing with motherfuckers that actually got some fucking sense. There's a big difference between dealing with women who ain't got no fucking sense or don't know their own self worth or overinflate their self worth and women who actually know their self worth. Big difference. Big difference is pretty much how it takes. Is pretty much what it is. Um, um, let's see. Do you think you're nerd? Do I think you're nerdy? Um, you can be nerdy sometimes, but typically when you're not wearing glasses, when you're not wearing glasses, you don't look nerdy. When you're wearing glasses, it can be seen as nerdy sometimes, depending on what you're doing. But if you're at the gym, you don't look too nerdy at the gym. Or when you're working out, you don't look too nerdy, basically. But if you're just chilling, walking around, being simple, you do look kind of nerdy. Um, but that's a good thing because the sad part about that is that opens you up for other markets outside of the black culture and the Filipino culture for all intents and purposes. Because like we were talking about last night, typically with a lot of educated lame black men, typically a lot of those men get snapped up by white women and Asian women for all intents and purposes. White women and Asian, yeah, white women and Asian women is what the educated lame usually get snapped up by. Uh, every now and again, you'll run across a Indian woman with a black guy, an educated lame, and every now and again you'll run across a white women and mainly Asian women basically snap up educated lame men who look like educated lames or who are educated lames for all intents and purposes. So you're on the right path. And the question to you, Yam, is: did you apply for that North Drummond? Did you apply for that drumming company like I told you to? If you didn't, don't make me body slam your ass. Yeah, true. I actually answered that one. Yeah, definitely. Corey Steele. There's a lot of obviously, most of them live in China. They're damn near like them in India are damn near pretty much more than half the world's population by themselves. Facts. Yep. He's agreeing. Yeah, there's a lot of sexual inflation in America. Um, there's a shit ton of sexual inflation in America. The sad part about that, sexual inflation is actually higher in Australia, America, Canada. Yeah, yeah, America, Australia, Canada, the UK is Spain. Um, is where sexual in Canada basically, yeah, are higher in those countries than any other country for all intents and purposes. I don't know too much about New Zealand, but I heard New Zealand is not really hit bitch smack like the rest of these countries are. So yeah. As far as I talked to was it a Manly Load or was it no, it wasn't a Manly Load, it was the other one, the Shinobi one. And he said New Zealand's not bitch smack like the rest of these countries for all intents and purposes. Um, it's typically how this stuff works. So yeah, mainly Australia, US, Canada, Great Britain, Spain are bitch smack the hardest when it comes to this whole entire overinflation and value of women's sales for all intents and purposes. The neat thing about it is a lot of these women price themselves out of the market so much that they're saying stupid shit like I don't need no man, or I'm an independent woman, while talking out the side of her mouth, talking about where have all the eligible bachelors went, where have all the good men gone, or where have all the you know the good men, the prospective men went, basically, while they're still yelling out the other side of their mouth, I don't need no man, I don't need this, and I'm an independent woman. Out the other side of their mouth, they're yelling all this other shit, basically, and writing op-eds and shit like that. It's typically how that works. So, or what they say, suitable, dateable, dateable men, or suitable men, basically, is what they say. And like I was saying, when it comes down to the men in America, the sad part about that is it's not the fact that men stopped going to college. Men are still going to college at the same rate. It's just the fact that women are going to college at a higher rate. So the men are still going to school at these colleges at the same damn rate, for all intents and purposes. Um, it's typically how this shit works. So, and the sad part about that, what women don't realize is you just happen to double up or triple up how many men went to school. Because the sad part about that is here's how I know that the same amount of men are going to college at the same rate. Because they talk about, well, women going to school at a higher rate than men. Well, no, men are still going at the same rate. Not no men. There's the same amount of men that went to school before all these women went to school, or the same amount of men that's still going to school. The only difference is now a lot of these colleges are now turning into universities. Typically, how this works is you go from being a college to a university one of two ways. One of the main ways is if you double your student body, for all intents and purposes, double or triple your student body, and get over a certain amount of numbers, you become a university. Good example of that is Point Park College. Used to be Point Park College. Now it's Point Park University. Um, a few other colleges were like that too as well. They went from being called colleges to universities for the fact that they doubled or tripled their student body, for all intents and purposes. Even Pitt is growing in size. The sad part about that is Pitt, Temple, all those colleges are growing in size. All these universities are growing in size for the fact that it's not men that are going, it's more women that are going. The sad part about that, all you have to do, here's the thing, when you actually look at a college town, go to a college town, look at the amount of women that actually go to school there, and remember the amount of women who didn't go to school there before. Because typically, a good example of that is CMU. CMU is a good example, a perfect example of that. Typically, way back when I used to live in Pittsburgh, CMU was one of those colleges where some women went to those colleges, but mainly men went to those colleges. So typically, most of their body was made up of men. Okay, cool. It is known as their tech school and all that stuff, and performance art and tech and all this stuff school, for all intents and purposes. Okay, cool. So typically men went to that school on average. Now what happened was there was a nice shift where a lot more Asian women, a lot more Asian girls are coming in, a lot more Indian women are coming in, and all this other craziness was coming in also as well. So what happens with that is, what's up, Mr. Forma? What happens with that is the number of women actually doubled and tripled the actual student body, whereas the men's population stayed the fucking same at these schools. This is typically why women had this overinflated ego now, because they think they're going to go to school and meet a man. Meanwhile, they outnumber the men at school like women outnumber men in Russia. That's typically how it works. So the sad part about that, it's the same amount of men that's actually going to school at these places. It's the same amount of men going to school at these places. They just bolster the student body with a bunch of women. It's typically how that works. So all these women thinking they're going to meet all these guys. Meanwhile, they outnumber the guys literally like it's Russia. They literally outnumber guys like they're Russia or Ukraine. Like they're in Russia or Ukraine, for all intents and purposes. So typically, like here's how it works, basically. If you go to college, the same amount of men go to the school as it always been, for all intents and purposes, and it's always been. What happens now is you got a bunch of women in college. Now all of a sudden, for every one male college student, it's either 1 to 3 or 1 to 7. It's typically the range that it usually falls between when it comes to college males at school. You're either going to be outnumbered by 3 or you're going to be outnumbered by 7. So for every one male student at a college, He's either outnumbered one to anywhere between there's either three women to him or seven women to him. So it fluctuates either be anywhere between 1 to 3 or 1 to 7. So any college that you go to, the men are always going to be outnumbered 1 to 3 or 1 to 7. Between 1 and 3 and 1 to 7. So it could be a 1 to 5 school, it could be a 1 to 6 school, it could be a 1 to 4 school. You basically know, you basically get my drift on that. This is typically why women think that they have this is typically why women have this overinflated ego of themselves, because the sad part about that, they don't really think long term in America. So typically they get themselves jammed up thinking like, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to meet a hot guy, and he's going to graduate, and he's going to be marry me, and it's going to be all this stuff. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, you and about 1 or 3 or 1 to 7 other women are about to try to go for the same damn guy. So the sad part about that, all these women at college outnumber the men at college. The sad part about that, the number of men going to college never changed. The number of women going to college is what changed. That's it. That is it. Now the number of men may have dropped like 1, maybe 2%. However, that's 1-2%. That's hardly noticeable for all intents and purposes, comparative to all the women that go to school. And the sad part about that is they always talk about, well, the number of men going to school dropped. No, the number of women that go to school tripled and doubled. So the sad part about that, the more people you add to the pool, the lower that number is going to be. That'd be like saying, a good example of that is if Mexicans didn't come, if Latinos didn't come to America at the same rate that they did, black people would still be the number one minorities for all intents and purposes. If Latinos didn't come to America at the rate that they did, it's typically how it works. But because they did, now they're the number one minority, and black people are the number 2 minority, soon to be the number 3 minority. Because apparently now, either Arabs or Asians are pretty much going to surpass them pretty soon here, sadly. It's typically how that's working. Swag. The best way to put it is you look like you're very confident in yourself, and you look like you can handle yourself and stuff like that for all intents and purposes. And you don't look like, if somebody was to say something to you, you seem like the type of person like me where it's like, yeah, whatever, like almost like you're nonchalant about shit when people try to lob insults at you for all intents and purposes. What I mean by that, so you have this air about you, or way about you that says, bitch, I don't care what you think about me. I'm sexy no matter what. Or like, you kind of remind me of Chow from Hangover. Basically, you don't give a fuck what's going on around you. You're gonna do you no matter what, for all intents and purposes. That's the way you. I'm not saying you act like Chow, but it's like that's the way you pretty much act. Like, the one part when he got out the car and he does a little jacking off motion, go bitches. Or I forget what he said. Basically, it's like you just don't care. It's like you're there, and it's either you love me or hate me type attitude that you look like you carry with yourself for all intents and purposes is what I'm talking about. Yeah. What's up, former floors? Yeah, but you're fine, manly low. This is basically I'm wrapping up the Date-Cation series basically with this one with Q&A. So if you got any questions, if anybody got any questions, you can ask questions too. Not, Joe Montana's not the only one that can ask questions, or Yam. You can all ask questions too, if you want. If just in case nobody thinks of anything, I'm pretty sure one of y'all would think of something for that person. Like an important question to ask. So yeah. I'm trying to think. I covered a lot of stuff. Any more questions, guys? Um, every country that's not America loves the American accent. UK, Great Britain, I mean UK. Every country pretty much loves the American accent. You might get to France, and you might get some cocky little bastards though, but typically I would dodge France for that reason, for all intents and purposes. Unless you speak French very well, I would dodge France. Um, Other than that, all countries like the American accent because because for some odd reason, there's something about the American accent that because the country's who it is that it has some type of power or some type of dominance or has some type of supremacy for all intents and purposes is the best way I can describe it to you. So the American accent's always going to be popular in other countries for this reason, with the exception of France. I would say don't go to France. Never go to France. Don't go to France. They're condescending pricks. And you're more than likely want to get into a fight with a French person, if anything. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some nice French people in France, but you have a better chance of smashing somebody in Great Britain. You have finding a decent person who actually got some sense and act like they're not better to you in France. Is the best way I'm gonna put it. You have a better chance of actually smashing somebody in California than you do have a chance of actually finding a decent person to talk to who won't treat you like shit in France. Pretty much, is what I'm going to say about that. Um, um, to answer your question, Mr. Forma, you should already know the answer to that question. We talked about this in the one live stream when I was talking about you should definitely go to India. When you said she's trying to get me to go to India, trust me. The sad part about that is the thing that people don't understand about a lot of Indian people, or what they don't understand about a lot of Asian guys or Asian people in general, is typically Asians and Indians typically can see potential in somebody. The irony to it is if that Indian woman didn't see if that Indian woman didn't see potential for you to be her business partner, she wouldn't have never came to you. So Indians and Asians are good at seeing potential in somebody. It's pretty much how it works. That's typically how that panned out, and that's typically why you're her business partner for this reason, because she's seen a lot of potential in you. She's seen a lot of hustle in you. She's seen a lot of drive in you. She's seen a lot of this stuff in you. And the sad part about that is I'm willing to bet any money if your business partner weren't dating somebody or she is dating somebody, I'm willing to bet any money she'll be willing to date and marry you for all intents and purposes. Um, and your Indian friend, your Indian female friend that hang out with you, she's probably willing to drop her boyfriend for you. The problem is though, she's waiting to see what you're willing to do. That's typically how that works, Mr. Forma. So basically, the fact that they see a lot of potential in you is how you got in the door. The fact that they seen that today you have a lot of drive, you have a lot of commitment, you have a lot of passion, you have a lot of you have a lot of hustle in you basically, and people see this in you, and they're going to want to either work with you or take advantage of that basically, so they can make for a better company or stuff like that for all intents and purposes. So typically, what happens there is that both those Indian women see highest amount of potentials in you because you said you have your Indian friend, but you also have your business partner who's Indian. So typically, they've basically seen a lot of potential in you, a lot of drive, a lot of go-getterness basically in you for all intents and purposes. Is typically how that works. Yeah. Trust me. Just don't put your guard down, Mr. Foreman. You'll be okay. The minute you put your guard down, you're done. We ain't gonna be calling you Mr. Foreman no more. We're gonna be calling you uh former Chowdhury. or former Curry. Or Mr. Curry or Mr. Chowdhury. Or Mr. Patel. That'll be your name from here on out. I always look on Freaky Jersey Tales. That's something. You better leave them Indian women alone. we're going to be calling you Freaky Curry Tail. We're going to be calling you Freaky Curry Tails, or we're going to be calling you, Freaky Jersey Chowdhury, or Freaky Jersey Patel. Don't mess with them. Don't get caught up. Don't get caught up. Because, like I said in my live stream, Indian women typically have this. Remember when I told you in my one live stream that like what Indian women are different for the fact that they typically play like this Jedi mind trick on you, basically. Like the Jedi's do that thing where they wave their hand in front of somebody's face to convince them that basically Indian women do the same damn thing verbally to men. So it's one of those things where like don't get yourself. Try to keep yourself out of much trouble as humanly possible. Or try to avoid them as much as humanly possible, because your ass will end up probably married to one after a while, after they wear you down. And Indian women are very good at wearing men down. Oh, they're very good at wearing men down. Trust me, I've dated a couple. Well, if girls already approach you in Cali, you won't have a hard time anywhere else in the world for all intents and purposes. Hell, you can go to Minnesota and get some girls if that's the case, Joe. Sadly, you can pretty much go anywhere if that's the case. If they approach you in California, you're good. You're good. You're straight for all intents and purposes, pimping. You ain't got to worry about shit. You ain't got to worry about shit at all. If that's the case. So it's one of those things where yeah, if they already approach you in California, you're good. The sad part about that is you'll pretty much be good to go in other countries if that's the case. Because if women are approaching you in California, you ain't got to worry about shit really. Just go over there and just do you basically, and do you big. Because that's what it sounded like to me. If they approach you in California, you ain't got nothing to worry about in any other country. It's going to be a lot easier for you in a lot of those other countries. The sad part about that is you may get some stuck up women, but they're not really stuck up. They play hard to get, or they'll tend to like tease you or egg you on. Basically, it's typically how it works. Whereas in America, they talk about playing hard to get as if they're interested in you, just tell them no. Like why would you do that? Why would you tell somebody no? I'm not interested if you're interested in that person. That's just playing games. That's not playing hard to get. That's playing games. That's typically how that shit works. So, that's how a lot of women act in America. Though, even if they want to be with a guy, or even if they want the guy, they basically would tell them no, that they're not interested. Meanwhile, they want the guy, and they'll string him along, hoping that eventually he keeps on trying. And the sad part about that, men are catching on to this shit. And typically, they basically opt out for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where it's been one of those things. So you basically just got to look out. You got to look out for what you're doing for all intents and purposes for this reason. It's typically how that works. So you just got to avoid those annoying ass women for all intents and purposes. You'll be fine. And typically in America, that's why I was trying to go with that. In America, you typically get a lot of those goofy ass women. What's up, Billy the Goat? You get a lot of those goofy ass women who will typically, do and say stupid shit, basically, but then be like, well, I wanted you to try harder. Well, no, you said you weren't interested, so therefore, why the fuck would I try harder? If you're not interested, you're not interested. And the sad part about that, it went from playing hard to get to playing fucking games, basically. So and typically a lot of the men are tired of it and are opting out. See, you're laughing, Mr. Foreman. You already know. You already know. You already know, pimping. About them Indian women. Seems. Okay, so he's talking to Corey. Okay. It's been ages since I had a curry. Damn. I'm hungry. Just don't ask it. Just don't knowing you and Manly Low. Just don't ask an Indian woman to do it. because you end up married, messing around with messing around with her. Your ass will end up married. We'll be calling you Billy the Goat Curry, Billy Curry Goat. So yeah, no, yeah, you might want to go to a restaurant and get that handled, and not meet an Indian woman because you might end up married. Matter of fact, make sure the woman that's making your dish isn't single because you might end up married after that dish. What's up, Billy the Goat? Oh, good lord, that's too funny. What you want a curry goat or you want a curry lamb, or what do you want? Typically, I would say go to one of the farms to buy one to do it if you're going to do it. Typically, go to one of the farms or go to one of the goat farmers basically to get curry goat or curry lamb basically if you really want that and you want to make it yourself. You want a proper one. I would typically go to a farm, a goat farm or a lamb farm or a sheep farm basically to go get one. If that were you, Billy the Goat. Um, Typically how that works, Mr. Forma. I'm going to mind my business. Sorry. You got a mouthful. You got an earful apparently. Okay. Got one from Just Eat. Nice. 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 Yeah, typically you can actually go. You can either go to the supermarket and purchase one, or you can go to actual farm to get one. You can either have them prepare for you, or you can take it to a butcher and have them prepare for you. Either way, unless you can do it yourself, do it yourself. Then, if you can do it yourself, um, you make your own. Oh wow, 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 interesting. A manly load over there, throwing down in the kitchen. What's up? What's up? You okay? Dude, if you can get girls in, like, here's the thing: if you got girls walking up to you in California, Joe Montana, you fine, dude. You fine. You good. You good. Because the sad part about that, women all over the rest of the world aren't as stuck up as women in California. So typically, how it's going to work is you're pretty much already in the fucking door for all intents and purposes. There's not very much. There's not very much you have to do really. Besides, just don't be over there overplaying your hand and just be yourself and do what you do when these women in California walk up on you because you're pretty much good and in the door if that's the case. So there's really not very much. Um, just don't be disrespectful. Be very respectful to them. I would say if they come from a very conservative culture, as long as you're not trying to put their business out there, or as long as they trust you not to put them out there on Front Street, because typically the difference between a lot of these women and women like American women is women in America would pretty much put it on Instagram that they got sex or they did a slut walk or they did all this extra shit or they're half naked on Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat and shit like that. Typically, a lot of these women from those countries typically avoid pictures like that. So typically, they tend to be more conservative about their image. So typically, as long as they can trust that you're not going to put them out there on Front Street, you're fine. You're fine, dude. You're fine. It's typically how that works, dude. So as long as you keep their sexual exploits or sexual explorations to yourself, and don't be going around the country telling everybody about it, you're fine. It's typically how that works, and that works in Estonia. That works in just don't run around opening your mouth to everybody telling what you got, what you did. Basically, it's basically like the old gentleman saying, uh, "A gentleman doesn't kiss and tell," or what a gentleman keeps his mouth shut about. the bedroom for all intents and purposes. Just do that for all intents and purposes. You would never have to worry about anything, especially in Poland, Belarus, Russia, um, Ukraine, a lot of the Asian countries, unless it's the Philippines and Thailand. You can pretty much run your mouth there if you want to. Colombia, they typically are more casual. They're typically more casual about sex for all intents when it comes to talks and talks about sex. They're typically end up being more casual. The sad part about that is the reason why a lot of the women are wising up to a lot of the men going to those countries, especially in Latin America, is typically because these men are dumb enough to actually put these women out there on Front Street. That's typically how this works. So it's getting to be much harder to actually go to a lot of these countries because you got goofy ass men that want to gloat about what they did and who they did it with in all these fucking countries. This is typically how this stuff works. So as long as you keep your mouth shut and you keep it to your fucking self, you'll be fine. If you seem like one of the men that's going to make a video about it or be taking pictures and shit like that and talk about this woman I did at the club or where I met this woman at, you're going to be swept under the rug and skipped on for all intents and purposes when it comes to these women. So typically, like I said, just don't kiss and tell. Um, Basically keep it to yourself. Treat it like Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas is the best way I can describe it to you. That's all you got to do, Joe. Yeah, I kind of figured you did, a manly load. I kind of figured you did. manly low, manly low, ape, manly low, about to get himself into some trouble if he keep on going around that Janice girl. That Janice girl, he about to be a Janist himself. We're gonna be calling him a manly Janist. keep trying to talk to that. Keep trying to talk to that Janice girl. You're gonna be in trouble. Trouble, 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 trouble. Yeah, that sounds good right now. Now you're making me hungry. Now I'm about to go heat that. Oh, now I'm about to go make that my damn self. Thank you, Billy the Goat. Make me quit this stream just so I can go make me some curry with some Bombay potatoes. Thanks, Billy the Goat. Now I'm hungry. Yeah, what Manly Low said basically it's PUAs and people that like to gloat about their notch counts is the ones who are actually fucking it up for everybody else under the sun. It's typically how it works. I better stop at Costco's then. Shh. Yeah. this guy. this guy. this guy. The looks and attitude, the attitude towards a lot of these women, like I was saying, I said it already, they're typically more conservative. So, like I said, as long as you don't put them out there on Front Street or put their business out there, like women do in America, like with their sales, you'll be fine. Typically, a lot of these women are still conservative. The sad part about that is the least conservative women in these countries are more conservative than the most conservative woman in America. Think of it that way, because the most conservative women in America tend to be more liberal comparative to these women. It's typically how that works. So just keep like I said, just keep it to yourself. Treat it like Vegas. Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Uh Joe. So basically that's what I'm talking about. Like whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So basically keep it to yourself. Don't be trying to make like 900 videos about all the women you smash in all these countries. Because the sad part about that, if you do that, it's going to get around and people are going to see it and people are going to be upset. So next time you go back to that country, you're not going to see a warmer. You're not going to see a warmer. You're not going to see a warm reception like you would if you just act like you got some sense for all intents and purposes. And that's typically the overall culture and ease that it is that for all intents and purposes. Like as long as you can keep your mouth shut about her, about what she got going on and what she's doing with you, you'll be fine. So yeah, just keep it to yourself any discretion that you do with her. Don't say anything. Don't be trying to post it on Facebook. Don't post it on Twitter or any of that shit. Don't even like if you have her picture, keep it in your fucking phone and leave it in your phone. Don't be trying to show the world. Basically, keep it to yourself. Yeah. The sad part about that, if they approach you in California, they'll approach you in other countries. You'll probably get much more. You'll probably get a lot. You'll get approached a lot more in those countries for the fact that you get approached in California. So it's one of those things where you ain't really got to worry about much for the fact that you get approached in California. You may not be to the extent that you want, but you get approached a lot in California, which lets me know that you're a very approachable person. Women are willing to walk up to you and talk to you and say stuff to you because obviously there's something about you for them to want to do that in the first damn place. So typically what's going to happen is as long as you carry that same attitude over to those countries, you'll be fine. Still be humble though, but you'll be fine. Mr. Forum has a trip. This guy. A manly Janice. Is that like Monk on steroids? Well, yeah, normally, but in this case, not for you. Yeah, like I said, you better not go around that Janice girl. Better not go around that Janice girl. You're gonna be a manly Janice. Mr. Manly Janist. But normally that would be a monk on steroids. But in this case, not so much if you go around that girl. We ain't gonna be able to talk to you no more. She gonna tell you, you don't need them red pill people. You don't need them MGTOW people. We're gonna be like, oh, come on, and Manly, don't leave us. Homie. Really, homie? Better leave that Janice girl alone. You better avoid her. Don't give her no eye contact. Don't hold the door for her. You better avoid her. Yeah, and I typically answer that question. The attitude is basically the same. They're very conservative. What I'm saying is basically they're very conservative. They're actually very conservative. So when you talk to them, they don't like to be out there on Front Street. They're not going to be the type that's going to be having sex in public. Now there are that type, but typically these ones, it's one of those things where you go back to the hotel room and you do it very discreetly and just conservatively for all intents and purposes. Is the best way I can actually describe it to you. For all intents and purposes. So basically, they're very conservative about their actions and their sexual conquests and stuff like that. They like to keep it to themselves, and they like you to keep it to yourself too, and not tell the whole entire world about it. For all intents and purposes, is the best way I can describe it to you. So you're going to be fine. The attitudes are pretty much going to be what it is, and it's not going to be any different. And if they approach you in California, you'll get more approaches in other countries. I don't know if the Australian women like Asian guys, but I do know what I do know is typically a man from out of a man from a man from out of not from their country tends to pique Australian women's interest. What I've noticed, like men from their country, it's like you've seen one, you've seen them all basically, but a man from another country, especially like America's. Men from America tend to pique Australian women's interest whenever they touch down in that country. Is the best way I can describe it to you. As far as like dating wise, I wouldn't really mess with it for the fact that it's a feminist shithole. I wouldn't really mess with that country for that reason. I mean, there's probably a chance that you can actually get away with it and do it and be okay, but to avoid the whole entire feminist shithole portion of it, I would avoid it for all intents purposes. I mean, but I would definitely, if you want to go and check it out, definitely go and check it out and see what it's like for you. But typically, I would avoid it for the fact that their feminist is like way worse than the rest of the Western world's feminists for all intents purposes. They're not the worst feminists in the world, but they're worse than America, Canada, and the UK is the best way I can describe it to you. The only country worse than all of them is the feminist in Argentina. They typically have the worst feminists in the whole entire world. So if I had to pick the worst feminists in ranking order, I would go with Argentina, Australia, um, Spain. No, hold on, I'm sorry. I would go with Argentina, Australia, and Spain. I would say United States and UK, and then Canada. As far as like feminists, as far as like having a worst feminist, um, is typically how I've ranked them. So yeah, uh, yeah. Typically, women in other countries are typically more friendlier to outsiders than they're typically more friendlier to outsiders than their actual people in their own country. Like a good example of that is if you go to Canada, if you go to Canada, Canadians are much more friendlier to you than they are to probably other fellow Canadians. Um, it's typically how that works. So it's one of those things. Is the best way I can describe it to you, Joe Montana. They're typically more like Canadian women or Canadians and Canadian women are typically a little bit more friendlier to outsiders. Like a good example of that is the best way I can describe it to you is you know how like black people get like this bad rap. One thing I can say about Canadian women of any from any walk of life, let it be any culture, is I remember the one time I got lost in Canada when I first went there, and I was looking for because I was looking to buy my house in Canada, um, and I was looking to buy like the condo in Canada basically, and I got lost. So I literally asked a student who was on her way to class, how do I get here? And she literally stopped what she was doing, despite the fact that she had to be at class, to literally tell me which direction I need to go, which street I'm on, and where I went wrong at on what street. She basically broke it all down for me to the point where you'd have thought I was walking around like I lived there all my life, basically. So she gave me enough. She gave me enough direction and enough all this stuff to basically be able to get around Canada like I lived there for all intents and purposes. Is the best way I can describe it to you. Only thing I can say is if you go to France, they typically aren't really the nicest group of people in the world. French people are typically not the nicest in the world. Like you're more than likely going to want to get into a fight with a French person. Typically, is how that works. Is the best way I can describe that to you, Joe Montana. But typically, women in other countries tend to be better towards foreigners than in your own country, than their own country for all intents and purposes. Now, don't get me wrong, because they have the era of being from that country, you might get looked over for that reason. But at the end of the day, foreign men typically do better in a lot of countries for all intents and purposes. Um, and manly load. I'll be busy eating. I'll be busy eating bean curry, right? Long live Double A. Yeah, he's still working on a case to get his children back. So he'll be back whenever he's done with that, and he goes on his little adventure with his children, basically around the country, basically with his children. So he'll definitely be back. So don't worry about that, Mr. Forma. Um, I'll tell him that you dropped a line in the comment section. But yeah, yeah, yeah. Women from other countries are typically a lot cooler. They typically act a lot. They actually act really really nice. Like a good example of that girl that gave me a shit ton of directions. She was actually an Asian girl from Canada that gave me those directions. So what happens with that is you would typically think, avoid the black man or the black man dangerous, basically. She was actually very nice and she was very helping with me trying to find where I needed to go, which was actually really nice of her. And the sad part about that, the same thing goes for the white women. When I got lost, the same thing goes for The same thing goes for the white women. The same thing that goes for the white women and Asian women basically were really, really good. Um, Another group of women I've noticed in Canada that typically catch a bad catch it bad when it comes to like border patrol and the border police basically is Arab women and Indian women. If they look a certain part, they typically get picked on by border patrol. So typically they'll pull them over to the side and actually do a search on them. It's typically how that works. Um, um, as far as translators, unless you have like a personal guide or a person who speaks English, you hook up with you find somebody who speaks both English and that language. That'll be the best way you can actually do it. Typically, a lot of these people in a lot of countries speak English. English is one of the fastest growing languages in the world for all intents and purposes. Um, it's not as quite as fast as Mandarin, but it's growing very quickly. A lot of people from a lot of different walks of life in a lot of different countries typically want to learn how to speak English. Everybody from Singapore to China to Japan to Spain to Korea, any of the Koreas to Russia to Belarus to any of these countries to Estonia to Germany to all these people. The sad part about that, a lot of them actually speak English very well, especially in like the Dutch countries. They speak a lot of English. They typically speak a lot of good English for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where like you're never going to really have to worry about not being able to communicate because there's typically a decent amount of people who speak the language. Especially if you're lost, you can always find somebody who knows English, um, or knows enough to actually get to where you are, or knows enough to know a person that can actually help you get to where you need to go. It's typically how that works. So yeah, you never really have to worry about that when it comes to language. Um, yeah, you're a trip with that one. Two feminists walk into a bar, everybody gets arrested. Pretty much, yeah. Sounds about right. Typically, the language translators kind of suck because they don't actually have actual people on them to actually correct them. So they typically work off of their knowledge. So I wouldn't really rely on one to do that. Typically, a lot of these countries that I've named, there's somebody there that can actually speak English. So you never have to you there's typically you never have to really worry about stuff like that for all intents and purposes because there's always somebody there that'll be there to actually help you out. Joe Montana. What? Well, yeah, there's that translator, but I typically don't really rely on translators for the reasoning that a lot of times, a lot of stuff that you're trying to actually translate don't translate properly sometimes because some of the apps aren't really up to date, or up to code with a lot of the languages. So you typically end up with a lot of words that you might end up disrespecting somebody, or it's not accurate, or it's informal. And the sad part about that, you never want to be informal with somebody if you're not friends with them. Unless you're friends with them, then that's the only way you can be informal with them and say something informal. Because a lot of the times, a lot of these apps will give you an informal term. And if you say something informal to somebody who you don't know, you'll typically end up in a world of hurt, or they'll take it as a sign of disrespect for all intents and purposes. So never really use apps for the fact that you'll end up with the informal version of what you're trying to say. Meanwhile, you don't really know the person, so you want to keep it formal. When you start getting to know the person, that's when you can start being informal. Is the best way I can describe it to you. Like there's informal English, there's informal Spanish, and there's formal Spanish. Typically, informal Spanish is made for those who are family and friends. You don't speak informal Spanish to somebody who you don't know. That's a perfectly perfect stranger for all intents and purposes. Is the best way I can describe it to you. Um, yeah, they don't. Um, the neat thing about it, the one thing I can say about Brazil, as long as you go to one of the as long as you stay at one of the touristy hotels, you'll get English. The minute you leave that touristy hotel, not so much. Not so much. That's one thing I can say about Brazil. Like they typically hold out longer on speaking English. Um, or they typically avoid speaking English even if they know English. And that's one thing I can say about Brazilian people is they'll basically do their best not to speak. They're basically like Hispanics in the United States. Just because they don't speak English doesn't mean they don't know English. Typically, a lot of times, either they just don't want to talk to you, or they don't feel comfortable with doing it. It's typically usually it's typically usually what you're going to get from a lot of those people. So when you actually deal with them, you're typically going to get somebody either who's not comfortable with it or typically don't want to talk to you. That's typically the two types of people that exist in Latin culture who don't speak English. You'll occasionally get the person who actually don't speak English, but typically the people who don't speak English or won't speak English to you in America are typically either they don't want to talk to you, they just don't want to talk to you, and that's just a dick move, or they don't feel comfortable speaking English. It's pretty much how it works. So it's one of those things, Mr. Forma. When it comes to the Brazilian people and they're Brazilian Portuguese, they typically stay close to what they're comfortable with. Do I have any funny, interesting dating and or hookup stories? Um, you typically really don't have to run too much game. You basically approach it the same way you would approach it the same way you would approach it. Like a good example of a lot of these countries, just approach it the same way you would approach it if it was like the 1950s and you were hooking up with somebody. Basically, nothing too flashy, nothing too ridiculous. Just do you, for all intents and purposes. You really don't have to be all that flashy. You basically just keep it direct and straightforward for all intents and purposes. And you basically let them know. And another thing I will say about that, you basically let them know what you want to do up front. If you want to just hook up with them, tell them you want to hook up. If you want to have a relationship with them, have a relationship with them. Don't tell them you want a relationship and then only hook up with them and then do this shit because typically you're going to run into a lot of problems because there's going to be a lot of trust issues there if you do that. Is the best way I can describe it to you. But typically keep it straightforward. You shouldn't really have to run game on a lot of these women. For all intents and purposes, you shouldn't have to run game. You should be able to keep it pretty even killed and easy for all intents and purposes. Basically, treat it like the 1940s and 50s when when a man was trying to woo a girl or court a girl. Basically, same concept. You really don't need all that flashy shit to do it. You really don't need pickup artistry game to do it for all intents and purposes when you go to a lot of these other countries. You only need that in America, Canada, UK, Australia. That's it. That's the only way you'll need that shit for all intents and purposes. All these other countries, you really don't need that shit. You really don't need game. You really don't need to run game on girls. You really don't need to do any of that shit because the sad part about that, what I've noticed about a lot of these women in a lot of these countries, they see it and they typically get turned off by it, or they typically avoid a lot of men who do this. Because the sad part about that, what you'll notice with a lot of the pickup artists, when they go to these countries and they run game on these girls, what they don't show you is all the women that turned them down. What they will show you is one of the girls that they got successfully by doing this. And the sad part about that is that girl that they got successfully doing this was the easy girl, basically. She was a very easy chick, basically. Typically is how that works. So typically, if you're going to be running game, you're going to want to run it on the easy girls because they typically like that type of shit. Most of the women don't. And if you actually come straight forward with them, they'll typically be easy to get. If you want to run game, I would go after the easy girls. It's typically how that works. But yeah, Mr. Farmer, you're right. They didn't get the memo on that shit at all. They definitely did get the memo on that shit. Um, yeah, I know. Yeah, don't do that either. Oh my god, I hate people that do that shit. Oh shit. Um, yeah, don't try to get a tattoo that you don't understand. If you don't know the language, don't get it. And don't trust somebody to actually tell you what it actually means because they got a lot of pranksters and jokesters in those countries too. So don't trust a person on what it actually means. Mess around and end up talking about like, I got courage on my arm. Meanwhile, you got like I'm pretty and pink on my arm and shit like that. I actually know somebody who got that. Yes, I did. And to actually answer your question on the funny hookup stories, I think I said this once in a live stream, and I joke about it a lot. Was when I went to Russia with my friends to basically look at the school I was going to go to. I was basically in Russia, and there was this girl that wanted my attention. She was really trying to get my attention. She was really, really like working hard to get my attention, and I basically just ignored her. And my friend Rue was trying to tell me. He texted me because he's a deaf mute. He's a mute, so he's trying to tell me that this girl is hitting on me. And I looked at his message and I kept on ignoring it basically. And that's typically how that works. So what had happened was we were at one restaurant, and as I was leaving, she kind of sort of stopped us. And like I basically walked around my friends and walked around everybody and just kept walking. And apparently she pickpocketed me. Now I didn't know that I was pickpocketed up until the time when we got to the bar that we were going to. So I got to the bar that we were going to, and I was about to pay for some stuff, and I was about to pull out my wallet to start a tab. Funny thing happened is I went to go reach for my wallet, and my wallet was gone. And I remember thinking to myself, that bitch got me, right? So I walked back around the corner to where she was, where I seen her last. And as soon as I got around the corner, she literally had my wallet in my hand, and she literally said to me in English, "Now are you going to pay me attention?" So that happened, and so we started talking and stuff like that, and I gave her we exchanged numbers, WhatsApp numbers and stuff like that, and I basically gave her my email and stuff like that, and I basically gave her my Facebook so we can message each other back and forth. And typically, what happened was we ended up hooking up that whole entire time in Russia. Now, the irony to it was, I don't know what happened or what happened with the whole entire thing, but apparently, I was good enough for her to want to have my passport. So the time I wanted to leave Russia, I couldn't leave Russia for the fact that I didn't have my passport on me. So now I'm sitting here stranded in Russia, and she said, "I'll give your passport back if you stay another week." So I go, "You better get my passport back, or we're gonna fight. We're gonna really fight. I'm gonna break up with you. I'm gonna hurt your feelings, and we're not gonna talk no more if you don't give me back my damn passport." So typically, what happened was I ended up staying a week longer in Russia, all because she stole my passport and hid it from me, basically in her house some damn where, and we basically just had dates and had sex the whole week I was there. From the time I met her to the time I left, we basically had a lot of sex, a shit ton of sex. I can't remember, like, it was so much sex. I couldn't even tell you how many times we had sex, because the sad part about that, it was so much of it literally blurred together. Like, it literally blurred together as much sex that we had. And the sad part about that is it was actually pretty fun. I actually enjoyed it. It was one of those times where I didn't get tired of sex, or I wasn't over it, and I was ready to go right after I was pretty much done, or ready to go again for all intents and purposes. And it was just so fun. And it was like it's almost like we had a connection of some sort. And that's the best story I can actually tell you about it when it comes to like one of the most hookup. Like, yeah, she literally picked my pocket to get my attention, only so she can get my attention, so she can actually talk to me for all intents and purposes, because I was ignoring her. Um, because typically, if you ever met me, I'm one of those people. If you walk up on me and you're a female, I automatically think I'm being an episode of Punked or Prank for all intents and purposes. So if a woman walks up to me and says something to me, I automatically think I'm on a set or an episode of Punked or Prank or Practical Jokers, basically. So typically, I don't really talk to women that just approach me out of nowhere randomly for this reason. Like, because I typically don't trust you, or I think like I'm going to be put on a show or some type of practical joker show. So I typically avoid reason women for this women not approach me for this reason in any country. But typically, it ends up panning out quite nice. But end up having sex, like ridiculously amounts of sex, for about like a week and a half, basically, all because she took my passport. And that's basically one of the craziest sexcapades that I'll tell you. Because yeah, that's basically one of the craziest sexcapades I'll tell you about because it's typically one of those things. I mean, I had a lot of them, but I'm not gonna even really talk about them because then certain people will start telling other people, and a lot of people actually know a lot of the people, and it's like, oh, oh, Tico was talking about this, and he's talking about what he did to you on his channel, and I don't feel like dealing with that. I really don't feel like dealing with a text message or a phone call, basically. But I'll tell you about that one because I don't think we're not in touch anymore, and we lost touch with each other. Um, but the sad part about that, one thing I can say, she does know when I actually touch down in Russia, so she does contact me when I touch down in Russia. So it's one of those things. So it's like whenever I show up, she drops everything she's done. She drops everything she does just to spend time with me for all intents and purposes. And that's one thing I can say about that girl in Russia. Um, um, Colombia, anywhere in Colombia mainly. Um, Costa Rica, I would say San Jose, Jocko, places like that. Um, if you're brave enough to travel there, Bravery. Um, I wouldn't really go to Bravery though because that's a matriarchal society within the country. So I would stay away from Bree for that reason, unless you just really want some. Um, I would say yeah, Jocko and San Jose basically would be your best bets for in Costa Rica. I would say as far as Colombia, anywhere in Colombia, Venezuela, anywhere in Venezuela because they're very receptive to men, especially if they're not from that country, and are willing to actually date or mess with any man not from that country for a chance at a better life or for a chance that they could convince you to want to marry them or date them for all intents and purposes. So like a lot of women in Venezuela would literally like try to get with you to basically and they'll compete with each other to try to do it too. Like a good example of a lot of women in Venezuela is typically like a good example. If you meet a woman in Venezuela, you can literally get her to fly from her country to your country to live with you. Even if you live in a hood. Like you can live in the middle of the ghetto in the United States, a Venezuelan woman will literally fly from her country to your hood. Like you can live in Compton. A Venezuelan woman would fly from her country to Compton just to get out of her country. That's how serious it is. That's how serious it is in Venezuela. So the easiest women out of Latin America, I would have to go with Venezuela. It's typically how I would say it. It's simply what I would say if you're going to go and date anybody. Venezuela would be the easiest women in Latin America. Um, Colombia's good, and Colombia's good, but Colombia's better if you know Spanish. Colombia's also a lot better. Colombia's also a lot better if you actually have a place of residence in Colombia. So Colombia opens up to you wider and greater if you have a place of residence there. Um, Venezuela is pretty stable enough for you not to have to worry about dying in Venezuela. Is the best thing I can say to you. Venezuela is pretty okay. Um, I know a guy that got that too, a manly load. I know a guy that got that too. Also know a guy that got I'm pretty in pink instead of courage. And it is inner wrist. No, it's probably not a joke. It's probably not a joke at all. Because a lot of tattoo artists think they're actually writing something on somebody, or a lot of people think because they got told that this means courage, that they're getting courage. Because there's a lot of women running around that actually got stupid shit, that actually got they got stupid shit tattooed on their wrist or their arm or their neck, thinking it means one thing and it means something else totally different because they don't do their due diligence. And the sad part about that, a lot of people copy these people and do the exact same thing and come to find out that it's not what it actually means. And the sad part about that, the biggest culprits of this is women. And the sad part about this, I wouldn't be shocked if your friend got that from a woman that said it means courage, or somebody told her it means courage. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it means you know, dick sucker or something like that, or you know, I like to gargle cock, basically, or something along the lines of that is what the actual tattoo actually reads. And the sad part about that is I'm not shocked at it in the least bit because there's a lot of Chinese character tattoos that people think it means what they think it means, and it doesn't mean that in the least bit. Because I know enough Chinese Mandarin I know enough Chinese Mandarin and enough Cantonese to know that okay, that's not even that in that language, and that's definitely not that in that language. For all intents and purposes, the best way I describe that to you. So it's definitely not a joke. I mean, it's definitely to your friend. He probably thought it meant something else, but to him, he's asking seriously if um if that's actually a joke. As far as Venezuela, it's it's very stable for people to travel there and actually go and visit. You nothing will happen to you if you go to Venezuela for all intents and purposes. Nothing's going to happen to you bad. Um, so you'll be fine in Venezuela. You'll have a worse time in Dominican Republic. You'll have a worse time in Dominican Republic than you would in Venezuela. You'll have a worse time in Dominican Republic and Greece, to be honest with you, than you'll have in any of these Central American or South American countries. Um, is the best way I can actually describe it to you. Like you have a better chance of going to Nicaragua and living, or El Salvador or Honduras and living, and finding women and living than you do in Dominican Republic or Greece. Um, it's not as dangerous as everybody makes it out to be. It has just a dictator that's making dumb decisions. That's about it. It's not really as dangerous as everybody's making it out to be. Um, do they speak English? Um, Typically in Venezuela, they speak a decent amount of English. They either speak beginner's English, like beginner's English, or they'll speak a little English or beginner's English for all intents and purposes. Um, However, I will say this: if you do go to Latin America and you put a woman's business out there on Front Street, if you put her business out there on Front Street, you will be arrested for disrespecting a woman in Latin America, for being disrespectful to a woman. So don't put her business out there on Front Street because you'll have the cops knocking on your hotel door if you're very disrespectful and put her business out there on Front Street. It's typically how that works. Because I've seen a lot of men get arrested, and then there's this one guy. There's this one guy in fucking Colombia. This one genius that thought it'd be a great idea to make a video, and he got reported by a woman, and he tried to actually spin it to the. He tried to spin it and say. He tried to spin it and say she's jealous of me because I cut her off. No, she's mad at you for putting her business out there, and now your ass is getting arrested. That guy ended up arrested. That video where that woman saying she's calling the cops on me, trying to say, well, she's saying basically I did her wrong and like and I robbed her and this, that, and the other, and I cheated her. No, he disrespected her and he got arrested. Now he's spending time in jail in Colombia for this reason. All because he didn't want to pay a fine and he thought it was a joke. And he put a video out there. He put a video out there on Pornhub, and now he's in jail in Venezuela now. I mean, Colombia now for that shit. Matter of fact, another guy went to jail in Brazil for the same shit too, for disrespecting a Latina. So yeah, don't do that shit. Keep it to your fucking self. Don't make thousands of videos about it, and don't be trying to put them out there on Front Street, in other words. But they typically speak beginner's English to a decent amount of English if you want to get around and meet somebody for all intents and purposes. And as far as Peru's concerned, Peru's pretty nice. Peru's a very nice country to go to as well. It's a very stable country. Them and Chile are very stable countries. And the problem with Peru and Chile is it might be a tad bit harder for you to get in. But if you do your due diligence, you can pretty much get in Peru and Chile with women for all intents and purposes. So you can actually get women in those countries, but you got to be more diligent about it in those countries than any other country for all intents and purposes. Less diligent than you all have to be in America, but more diligent than the rest of the countries that I pretty much named. It's typically how that stuff works. It's not the K-pop in Peru as much as it's like, just somebody not from their country, which ends up being like an aphrodisiac, or not aphrodisiac, an exotic basically. So it typically ends up being somebody not from their country that piques their interest. The neat thing about that in Peru, like I said, you actually got to put in a little bit more work than the rest of these countries, but less work than you have to put in America is the best way I can describe that to you, to answer that portion of that question. Any more questions? Any more questions or comments? And yes, they speak basic English to. They speak basic English. They're more likely to speak like very little English to basic English to intermediate English. There's very few of them that actually speak fluent English, but typically they know like a little English or intermediate English for all intents and purposes. It's typically what a lot of them speak. You're not going to get a whole lot of people, but you're going to get a lot of people that speak very little English, enough to hold somewhat of a conversation with you to get you where you need to go. You'll run into a lot more women that speak intermediate English, and it'll be more accommodating for you. And you'll typically meet a lot of the ones who speak very little English that'll be willing to actually translate for you as well. Um, Typically what it is one of those things, because like a good example, if you live in America, because because of the hyperinflation of women's ego and their self-worth, is pretty much the reasoning why for that question, Joe. For that reason, that's typically why it is, because women in the Western worlds typically have this overinflated self-worth or ego, basically, or they think they're equivalent to somebody else who they're really not equivalent to. So typically, a lot of these women are not typically a lot of these women aren't really material enough to want to date or talk to for this reason. So, it's one of those things where they think their self-worth is greater than yours, or they have this I'm superior to thou attitude when it comes to men. So typically a lot of men end up in a world of hurt with a lot of these women, or, just like a lot of pain and heartache for no reason within their own vicinity or their own places. Like a good example of that is like if you live in California, you have a better chance of hooking up with a woman in Minnesota, Montana, um, Florida, um, Wisconsin, Wyoming, places like that. For all intents and purposes, you have a better chance of hooking up with women in. Um, it's typically how it works. Oh, Michigan too. Yeah, Michigan as well. So like you have a better chance of hooking up with women in those parts of towns or those parts of the country if you're from California. Um, it's typically how that works. Ohio's another good example of that, and places like that for all intents and purposes, because women in your area are always going to think they're better. But then the minute when somebody travels to that area, it's the fact that they were actually able to get on a plane and travel to that area that makes it so that they typically are more desired or more looked at than most other men. Because the neat thing about it is, if you're from another part of the United States, the fact that you can get on a plane and fly to their part of the United States is amazing, basically, despite the fact that it's not as amazing as everybody makes it out to sound. But typically, a lot more people tend to a lot more people tend to be a lot more people tend to be receptive to people who are not from their state or city or places along the lines of that. Like a good example of that, I actually said this in a live stream the other day, a while back. I went to Baltimore for a YouTube business trip, basically for a Latin channel. We had a meeting in Baltimore because everybody had to meet in Baltimore instead of Florida like we normally do. So what happened was on my way back at the airport, I was waiting for my flight, and I was hit on by a tall African girl who looked sexy as hell. I ain't gonna purse. She was sexy as hell. I'd have smashed that. I was hit on by an Indian woman, and I was hit on by a Latina. Um, so no, she was an Arab woman. I'm sorry. I was hit on by an Arab woman, and I was hit on by a Latina, and I was hit on by a tall African woman. She looked good. She basically was like she had all the curves in the right places, and the fact that she was tall, she didn't look like she didn't look, and the fact that she was tall and the outfit that she was wearing made her look even sexier, basically. So she was able to show off a decent amount of her curves while still being conservative, and her legs looking real nice and stuff like that. Let's just put it this way: I wouldn't have minded if she'd have wrapped her legs around me and crushed me with them. I'm willing to say that. It's simply how that works. And the sad part about that is I got all their numbers too. And a matter of fact, it happened all in a matter of like an hour and a half. About an hour and a half of each other. I got numbers from all three of the women within an hour and a half of each other, basically, is the best way I can describe it to you. So typically, me being in Ohio would probably be one of those things where it's like, oh well, you're cute, but you're from Ohio, so no. Like, or me being from Pennsylvania or something like that, basically would be one thing. But like, it's one thing when you go to another state and city altogether. They typically end up being more receptive to you based on an accent that you carry or the way you sound for all intents and purposes. They typically they typically are more receptive of you and want to date you more if you're from another state or city, basically. If you're from another state, period, you're more likely to get play from a girl from another state than you are from a girl from your state. But however, I would say you're more likely to get play from a girl from another city in your state than you are to get play from a girl from your own city. It's typically how that works. Um, all because of the brand newness and the scarcity of who you are, basically, which typically keeps it interesting. Is the best way I can describe that to you. Um, so that's typically how that works when it comes to stuff along the lines of that. Any more questions? You can ask multiple at a time. That way we can keep it moving faster. Any more questions? Any more questions? Any more questions? Hmm. Um, I would go with Minnesota. Minnesota, I would say Minnesota or Montana would be your best bet if you're going to go as a guy. Or Minnesota, Montana, Wyoming, Wisconsin are all good places to go if you're an Asian guy. Um, I can't really put them up on a pedestal and say which one's actually better, but based on the dynamic and the dating preferences and the coupling that I've seen in those states, I would say those would be your best states to go to hook up and meet women, basically. Most definitely. Um, yeah, so that's pretty much that. Um, those states will definitely be a very good one for you to definitely check out. And typically, you will want to go to the major cities in those states anyway. So it's not like it really matters. You're not going to be going all over the state, basically. But I would go to the major cities in those states if I was going to, if you're going to go to those states and go visit people, go to the major cities in those states. So I would definitely say Wyoming, Wisconsin, Montana, Minnesota are definitely good places to check out. I would say Michigan, but with the shit that they're going through in Detroit, I wouldn't really mess with it too much. Um, um, those are typically going to be in your in a lot of other countries. Typically, America typically doesn't really have too many of those. Um, America doesn't really have too many of those, or you have to be well connected to actually get into some of those, and that's the cold hard truth. Um, but I would say I would avoid those because they'll typically cost you more money to going to those clubs than it would be if you just meet somebody. Than it would be if you just meet somebody if you paid for entry out of door, basically. Yeah, basically, it would be much cheaper for you to just go to a club or a bar or something like that and meet a girl than it would be for you to just show up at a sex club. Because at a sex club, you're going to end up spending more money at a sex club than paying for drinks on top of that, and stuff like that. So typically, I would just I would take my ass to a regular club. Would be your best bet. I would just go to clubs basically. So I wouldn't even mess with that whole entire thing. I wouldn't even mess with the sex club thing, unless you're going to Asia, Russia, or Amsterdam, um, Asia, Russia, Amsterdam, and Belgium, and places like that. Typically, um, um, what? This guy. He's a hot mess. By the way, jokes. By the way, this guy. Leave it to him to ask the most craziest shit. Yellowstone's supposed to blow very soon, and I wouldn't want to eat shit. I don't even like feet on me, so I don't want to eat shit. Yeah, the universe does have its own consciousness. They've actually found that it actually does. To be honest with you, to answer that question, even though it was a joke. Yeah, the universe does actually has its own consciousness. Um, when is it going to be? When is it going to? When are we going to have a curry night? I don't know. I guess we can all plan a trip and we all go eat curry, or we can eat curry on Friday Night Blaze or any other live streams that we'll have. Got no problem with that either. I typically eat curry quite often, so it's pretty much damn near always a curry night for me, for all intents and purposes. Like basically all the stuff that I basically said. If you're going to be dealing with a lot of these women, don't put their business out there on Front Street. Basically, keep it to yourself. The more you keep it to yourself, the more women will pretty much fall on your lap, because then now they know they can actually trust you. We're not putting them out there on Front Street or putting their business out there on blast. Basically, is the best thing I can actually tell you if you're going to travel as a man for sex and or relationship advice. Don't don't put their business out there on Front Street. Don't be praying around their information or their pictures and shit like that. Talk about what you did, how you did it, when you did it, and shit like that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Um, Typically, dating advice. If they're conservative women, act accordingly. Um, because there's a lot of women who don't like PDA, and there's a lot of women that are okay with PDA. So you basically got to learn them based on who they are as a human being. Because there's women that'll like PDA, and there's women that'll flirt with you and show you PDA, but they don't want PDA in return. They're basically flirting with you to let you know they're interested in you. So if they show you PDA, not all the time are they going to like PDA. They're basically doing it to let you know that they're interested in you. It's typically how that works. So a woman might a moment while you're talking to a woman, she might brush up against you or rub you, or brush up against your cheek or kiss your neck or bite your ear or breathe in your ear on purpose. She's basically letting you know she's interested in you. All of she doesn't That doesn't necessarily mean she likes PDA. So you got to basically be able to know that woman for all intents and purposes is one of the many things that you'll run into in a lot of these other countries. Because if a woman's showing PDA, she's basically showing PDA to let you know she's interested. She may not like PDA in return, but she'll show you PDA to let you know she's interested in you in a lot of these countries. It's typically how it works. Um, Now there are women that do like PDA, but typically they like to pretty much keep it on a down low for all intents and purposes. And what I mean by down low, like nobody has to know, basically, like that song. Nobody has to know. Yeah, that R. Kelly song. Keep it on the down low. Nobody has to know, basically. It's typically how they operate. Unless y'all start dating, then they're going to start parading you around town. They're going to start parading around town to their friends and family all after that, for all intents and purposes, if y'all start dating, that is. So just keep it very cordial. Basically, like I said, treat it like the 1950s in America when men were courting women. Basically, with a lot of these women, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of women who like the handsy PDA stuff. You'll run into those and you'll learn those very quickly. But typically, a lot of them, vast majority of them, not really. They don't want everybody in their business, so they typically keep it silent and to themselves. Is the best way I can describe it to you. Basically. What's a healthy body count for a yellow man? There really isn't one for a Asian guy. There really isn't one. Um, because at this rate, how Asians are perceived, typically, if you do better than everybody else, you're pretty much higher quality than everybody else for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that works. So let's just say a good example. Let's just say a Manly Low says he has 20, a body count of 20. I'm not saying you actually have a body count of 20, Manly Low. Calm down before. I don't want you going on a Twitter war. I mean, I want you going on a keyboard war with me in my comment section. I'm just basically using that as an example. Let's just say Manly Low has a body count of 20. If you're an Asian man, you typically want to beat that or double that. Is typically where you want to be. Um, the irony to it is what a lot of people don't know is like even a body count for now in this day and age, a body count for black men and white men that high is starting to be frowned upon. It's starting to be frowned upon in the with this feminist movement thing going on. So it's starting to be frowned upon with that whole entire body count thing when it comes to black and white men more than black men, but it's still being frowned upon due to the feminist thing because they're seen as men who are users, abusers, and all this shit, basically. And this is typically how this shit works. Because they're just smashing and dashing on them, basically. So it's starting to be seen as like a bit of a problem for all intents and purposes, the best way I could describe it to you. Um, can a British guys on? Well, whenever I think this is the last one, but I'll be happy to have another one if that's the case. Um, I think the only person that's here from a British country is a Manly Load. Um, I think the only one here is a Manly Load right now. So That's pretty much all you'll pretty much get for right now. Billy the Goat was here somewhere, but I think Billy the Goat's from another country. I could be wrong though, but I think he's from another country altogether. But I'll be happy to have him in a stream if you want to drag him in for all intents and purposes. No, he said Date-Cation. That's the name of the stream, Date-Cation. Not defecation. You're a trip, manly load. I'm trying to see. Body count, what? 2.5, 20.5? Hey, don't judge me. You sound like me when I talk to people on the phone. I said that to a girl the one day. I go to her. Yes, I'm a criminal. And I'm happy to admit that shit. She goes, what do you mean? I go, don't judge me. Don't judge me. Matter of fact, I might as well drag them in now. Billy the Goat and a manly load. I'm dropping a link to you. I'll just drag them in now. And anybody from the UK, jump in. And Yam, start typing up your questions now because I don't want to hear no shit. Because they probably ain't got a whole lot of time. Yeah, you can call me or text me anytime you travel. I got WhatsApp app, so you can pretty much do that. I'm fine with that, most definitely. You got my email, so and I got yours now. So I'll just send you my WhatsApp number, and you can call it a day. Basically, you can call me anytime you want. Here goes a manly load.
Yo.
Apparently, Baron Yam got questions for you as far as Date-Cations. Here goes Billy the Goat. Susie clears the sound. There he goes. Apparently Baron Yam got questions for you as far as Date-Cations are concerned in the UK, I guess. I said, what, you know what, Baron Yam? I said, British people only.
Hello, everybody. You know, Baron Yam on steroids. I'm here to talk about the Rockefellers, and I actually picked up a woman by telling her about the banking industry, and she just got all flushed. She's like, "Oh, Bios, you're so sexy. You're so sexy."
You sound like Roseblades right now, a male version of Roseblades. You know that?
Wash your dirty cunt, you filthy fucking bitch.
But apparently, you have questions for these two.
Oh no, I was just trying to figure out or ask you guys questions about your Date-Cations and sexcapades to see if you guys have traveled Europe and dip your toes in for all the different countries.
I have traveled Europe, but I only had sexcapades really in the UK because I was still, you could call I was still a blue-pilled beta when I was going on to my holidays. I mean, I pulled a lot, but I never had any sexcapades. And then by the time I discovered PUA and all that stuff, I was pretty much MIG too. So
Yeah, I know. It sucks when they finally find it because it just ruined every. Americans talks about the shutdown that happens. It's a shutdown. Literally, like you just can't look at them or interact with them the same way after you kind of take that first step.
it was feminism was the biggest thing for me. You know, really understanding the nitty-gritty behaviors in female nature because of the influence of feminism. That wants to get highlighted. You know, I've said this before. That's saying that you'll never really understand a woman. But that's actually a complete bullshit because women are really easy to understand. You just need someone to lay it out for you.
Or pay attention. Or pay
Yeah,
attention
yeah.
to what they got going
Yeah.
on in front
But
of you.
like when
exactly, yeah.
It's typically like when I said about them nagging. When a woman starts nagging, that's the time as a man you should actually start paying attention to them because a lot of truths actually slip out of their fucking mouths when they're nagging. And the sad part about that, because men don't pay attention to women, or they'll say, "Oh, she's just nagging," and they typically ignore them. They typically miss a lot of the telltale signs from women. Is a good time to actually listen to women when they start nagging.
Mm-hmm. Where they're like, I'm just gonna go on a sexcapade and leave my significant other, not listening to her.
But I was at the stage of, because I've never been married, so I was at the stage of looking for that soulmate, because I was sort of into the New Age movement a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if it wasn't for people like Hammerhand and Howard Dare and the heavy hitters and Big John and a few others, was it Alex on Life and a few others I can't remember at the moment. Miggy as well, Miggy 101. If it wasn't for people like them, I wouldn't have understand women's longer game. So it was the older generations that really that filled in the gaps for me. Because still, even though I knew their nagging and what was done about, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know why it was wrong. And so it was
Mm-hmm.
them explaining how they went through divorce and how they had the kids took off them, and I already knew the shitty law system.
Mm-hmm.
People got the kids off them, but I was unaware of how women behaved after marriage, and I was already aware of how many marriages wasn't successful. So I just needed that cherry on top of the cake to get that full picture, and so those YouTubers gave me that full picture because I've had no male role models around me whatsoever, none. They've all been blue pill betas, imitating alpha. Whatever alpha means, because alpha can mean different things in different states and different scenarios. So and then by the time that cherry was put on top of the cake at the same time I was doing PUA. So PUAs luckily never had the chance to get the claws into me. I sort of clocked on to all their fucking simpery at a very early within like 2-3 weeks of finding PUA. So
Mm-hmm.
everything seemed to work out at just the right time. And then I went to Poland, and this is where I'm leading into my sort of sexcapades. But because I used a bit of PUA and I was aware of MGTOW. Like I actually got it was Valentine's the next day, and I decided I was bored. I'm gonna have some fun, and I got a date on Valentine's Day, and I had it, and I'm not gonna lie, she was great. I enjoyed it, and but then we said our goodbyes, and that was it really, because I just wanted a bit of fun. I wasn't fully aware of the Me Too movement then at the time. And it wasn't, and at the same time, Poland and Europe wasn't fully feminized. Because I went back 2-3 years later, and it was a fucking total different story.
Yeah.
Total different story, completely feminized.
What was what was your, because PUA, it's like not that many people really needed it, especially if you're just like lightly focused on something. You could pretty much talk to anybody fine. It's like if you're socially awkward, then you probably need PUA.
Yeah.
Something
Ironic,
that. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
ironically, I was, because I had a job in a band where for 10 years, where I had to ask all these drunk people for all the details and stuff. So social awkwardness shouldn't have been a problem with me because I had no role model. When it comes to women, I just lost my shit. And then when I was abroad, all that facade left, and I was like, if I was going to a club and all these women was coming at me, dropping off my arms, it was sort of a different. I was still getting used to the situation from not them not paying attention in the UK and over there. And then when but what the PUA experience did to me, It does have its place, but it's the monetization of knowledge which I've got the problem with. But the PUA has got its place because it does give people confidence. That confidence, along with the MGTOW knowledge, can give you social confidence in all aspects. And so, like, I can go approach a woman knowing what she's perfectly capable of now, but I've used the POA, the confidence I use in the POA to still talk to them, just to get by in life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just like
one thing I can say about Polish women that I've noticed is typically they're more receptive to American guys than they are to anybody in the European Union.
They do love the British.
Huh?
They do really like the British.
They do like their British too, but typically, well, Great Britain's not even in the well, they kind of still are, kind of just a bit. They never really took them out of it, the union, but they're working on getting out of it, but they haven't really gotten out of it yet. But
Agreed.
typically, what happens with that is typically, like, if you're from the UK or if you're from the US, typically Polish women are very receptive of men from those countries. Like, it don't matter what you are. You could be black, you could be white, you could be Hispanic, you can be, Polish women are down. They're a bit more conservative, but they're typically down. You're typically one of those women I was talking about. Just don't put your business out there on Front Street and keep it to your fucking self and don't run your mouth like most of these other guys do, and you'll be okay. It's typically how that works.
Yeah.
Just basically quit being a dick and keep it to your fucking self.
Yeah. The Polish are very proud people. Very proud people.
Yeah, they're very proud. You'll mess around and end up in jail in Poland for no fucking reason whatsoever.
You end up with broken fucking legs on the edge of the corner and a missing kidney.
In a lot of Latin America, you end up in jail or you end up beating battered family members if you put their information out there on Front Street like that. Hell, I've seen people banned from the whole entire country.
Fucking hell.
Like, you're not even if your plane goes through there, you're not allowed to come through there. Basically, is how it works. And to answer your question, Joe Montana, overseas, it depends on where you go. Like, basically, just basically go places where I told you to go, like Poland, Germany, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia. I would say North Korea, if that's your cup of tea. North Korea would probably be the best place for any man to go if they want to find a wife. As if you're really looking for a wife. But the question is, knowing how Tico is, I always say, if she's from that country, keep her ass there. Do you really want to stay in North Korea? If the answer is yes, more power to you. If the answer is no, then she would be good for long distance dating. But yeah, as far as stuff like that. So typically, right now, where it's at in this world, they are the best. They are the best things as far as like marriage material in this whole entire world. Is North Korean women. But the question is, do you really want to take that chance and live in North Korea to actually do it? Or do you want to take that chance to bring her back to your country, which I would typically say, no, don't do it. But typically what I've noticed with a lot of the North Korean women who live in the United States, all those women are still married versus your Southern counterparts. All the women are still married to the same people that they've been married to for a while or forever, or however long they've been married to. And their Southern counterparts tend to get divorces or break up or end up in other relationships or end up cheating and shit like that, unlike their Northern counterparts. So that's one thing I can say about Northern Korean women. They typically are more devoted to family and family and life, basically. However, I will say this: North Korean women, when it comes to their children, they're tiger parents. So they'll beat your ass if you do wrong in school. If you do wrong in school, then they'll come up to you like, "Are you hungry?" After you done beat the shit out of you, you're scared of them now. They're coming at you like, "Are you hungry?" Like, what the fuck? I don't even know you anymore, crazy bitch. So typically, they're very overbearing on their children for the fact that they're tiger parents as well. So they want their children to do well. So if their children fuck up, they're going to get fucked up, basically. It's typically how it works when it comes to North Korean moms. That's one thing I can say about them. And they don't really wear very little to no makeup.
Korean women. They wear very little to no makeup. You can usually tell the difference between a North Korean woman and a South Korean woman based on the clown paint that a South Korean woman gets on versus the lack thereof that a North Korean woman has on. Typically, North Korean women they'll put on like the most they'll do is they might do like rouge, or they might do something where they're trying to put color in their cheeks. Basically, that's about this. They'll try to put some color in their face. That is about the extent of that. They typically keep it very plain, basically, and they're typically tend to be very devoted to their family.
The South Koreans woman's more likely to be dating some dude who has skinny boy jeans and is like ultra
definitely.
feminine.
Yeah, definitely. Either that, or they'll probably be dating some guy that that's an asshole or a dick. But typically, Asian men are pretty much good to go anywhere in the world. They're pretty much accepted almost anywhere in the world. They're pretty much accepted almost anywhere in the world. Hell, you're even accepted in India, and other parts of Asia for all intents and purposes, and other parts of Arab America for all intents and purposes too. So I mean, not Arab America. I mean Arab countries as well too. So it's one of those things where it's like you basically just have to pick your poison and get there and get in and have fun. Basically, that's all it really is.
I mean, Asian men have a privilege in the United States of not being sexually desired.
Yeah, the sad part about that is we talk about them not being sexually desired, but the sad part about that is typically what I've noticed about all these like Indian men. Because they always talk about Indian men and Asian men. Typically, what I've noticed about Asian men.
What's the deal?
Indian men.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
A good example of that is what I talked about this in the last stream with women that are feminists. Typically, a lot of feminists will date Asian men, Indian men, and Asian men. Is how it typically works. If they're not dating a white man, they'll date an Indian man or an Asian man. But they're not like they're like very less likely to they're not willing to date a black man for all intents and purposes. It's simply how that shit works. But they'll date an Indian man or they'll date an Asian man. Is one thing I've actually found out statistically when it comes to white women that are SJWs and feminists. It's simply the nature of the beast.
Oh yeah, Indians and Asians, yeah, they definitely go after them because
feminists definitely date Indians and Asians. So feminist women will date an Indian or an Asian.
And so you kind of got to be able to converse with them about stuff. And if you're MGTOW or conservative or red pill, you got to be able to like if you piss them off, that pretty much makes them even more turned on. So just try to if you have to talk to them about SJW stuff, just try to be contradictory or contrarian.
Yeah, be contrarian. And the sad part about that, and these thing about Asians and Indians, they can always blame it on culture.
Yeah, they'd be like, "Hey, it's just how I was raised."
It's how I was raised. Yeah,
I'm not an SJW. There's no such thing as SJWs in India.
Yeah, no, it's typically how you basically do it. You can always hide it under the guise. You can always hide it under the guise of being Asian, basically, when it comes down to it. So typically, you can be contrarian when it comes to dating a SJW or a feminist if you're Asian. Oh, if you're a white guy, they're not leaving your ass. They might talk shit on your ass. They're not leaving your ass. They'll talk shit on you while sitting in a hot tub next to you, drinking champagne at a $1 million mansion and shit like that. While they're trying to say all white men are bad. Meanwhile, they're sitting next to a white man who's paying for their lifestyle, and they're drinking champagne that the white man paid for in a car that he paid for too.
Well,
that's simply how feminists work.
Asian and Indian dudes, they always will be able to use culture to get back, but you never hear SJWs being like, Asian men and Indian men are so oppressive. Yeah. Like, nah, they never say that. It's always white dudes.
You'll never hear them talk negatively
always
about
a white nibba.
You'll never hear them talk negatively about an Arab, an Asian, or an Indian. Ever.
Yeah, No Sweetheart is awesome on crazy stuff. No Sweetheart said that Mexican people are white people, but he's so crazy.
They're only considered white if they check off white in the box in America, basically. That's the only time. Yeah. They're typically not white. But typically what happens with a lot of this stuff is what a lot of people don't know is typically a lot of these same SJWs and feminists are prejudiced against black people, they're prejudiced against Latinos, and are prejudiced against what's the other group of people? White men.
Mm-hmm.
But the sad part about that, a vast majority that hate white men are living the lifestyle that a white man provided for them.
So, like I said, you just have to deal with the hypocrisy if you want to get laid. And like, I would say the majority, or like the maximum amount of time in a relationship with a SJW probably be about 2 years. At that point, you're pretty much asking for trouble too, and it's like definitely if you're a MGTOW, don't get married, don't have kids with them, and definitely don't move in with them because you'll actually see because SJWs are kind of filthy. Like a lot of people think that they're like anal because they're so they're so like progressive, but they really are very frantic.
They've all got daddy problems, so they wouldn't have daddy. Yeah. You want to call your daddy and fucking beat them up in bed and shit.
And choke them.
The sad part about that, a lot of those feminists actually grew up with a dad, but they still disrespect it. They still disrespect men, and that's something I've always found funny about that. You grew up with a dad, and you're disrespecting men. So what's your dad think about this? And that's basically always what I wanted to ask you. So what's your dad think about this?
Hell, I was roasting people on Facebook, and one of my ex's dads, who is a SJW, he actually said like, "I agree with you," and I was like,
ex's dad agrees with you and shit like that.
Yeah, I was like, damn.
Yeah, I actually had somebody inbox me when I was going on a roasting when I did the Tico Chainsaw Massacre post on our Facebook. I had somebody post like literally send me an inbox saying, I never really thought of you as attractive until you started posting this stuff. Like what? I mean, you found me attractive.
Right? It's like now you're firing shots on Facebook. Now I want to holler at that.
Yeah, now I want to holler at you. Yeah, because I barely post anything on Facebook, or I'll barely like comment under other people in the manosphere, or I'll typically go to like all the
I want to know what that stylist do
like that.
And them thumbs do. I want to know what them stylists do and them thumbs do.
So typically how it works. That typically, if I'm on Facebook, I'm typically in one of either the manosphere groups or the MGTOW groups or the MRA groups, or I'm in the Red Pill group basically, or they both English and Spanish. I think I'm even in the Russian one, the Indian one, and the Russian one, the Hindi one, which don't got too many members in it, which is pretty sad. The Indian one don't got too many members in it. It's sad. So a lot of the times, a lot of the Indian ones either go to the English one or the Spanish one for this reason, because there's more members in that one than there is in those rest of them. There's an Arab one. I'm in that one, and I'm in the I'm in another one with another language, but yeah. But I typically go on there just to see what the memes are and look at all the memes and laugh at the memes and shit like that. Some of those memes be funny as fuck. It don't matter what language it's in, it's funny as fuck. Russians got good sense of humors. Arabs got good sense of humors.
It's really juicy. All right, guys, I got a jet. But shout out to Armchair Revolutionary and Chronic Blast and Undead Chronic, because when you guys go on those Date-Cations, you guys have to ruthlessly smash.
Billy the Goat didn't get to answer your question, smartass.
Oh, what?
You about to just hang up on Billy the Goat and shit.
Not Billy the Goat. Sexcapades.
Say hello, Billy. I think he's having audio problem.
He's eating.
He's probably eating. He's probably eating curry.
You sound like a robot, bro.
Oh, this is fuckery. Sometimes it's not work. My mic's not working. Got it. Okay. Okay, so I guess we're going to end this and try to have them in for Billy to go. Don't forget to come around for. Are you free on Sunday and what time? You can type it in. Just type it in the comment section. That way you don't have to kill yourself.
All right, I'm going. Peace out, guys.
I'm trying to hook up with you, Manly Load, and Shinobi One to do Bleeding Edge Red Pill podcast.
Yeah, no worries. If it's right about this time, then we should be fine. Because
Okay.
Because it's like 20 to 11 now, mate. Over here.
So this time should be good for you too as well, Billy the Goat? Or a little bit earlier?
But maybe about 11 o'clock, because I think sometimes he's got to get his girl to bed. I don't know. His little girl to bed.
This time, so yeah?
Oh, he said yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll just make Bleeding Edge Red Pill for about this time on Sunday. That way Shinobi-1 can join us too.
Sound. Nice one. I appreciate that, Tico.
You're welcome. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and I really enjoyed doing this live stream for Date-Cations. This is going to be the last one, unless somebody asks me another question, and I'll start it back up again. But I think we answered every single question because Joe Montana seems very satisfied. So I guess this is it for the series, and if it has to come back up again, I'll be happy to bring it back up again.
Does a balloon filled with methane float or sink?
You know what? You're a trip. This guy. This has nothing to do with Date-Cation. Unless you're talking about a cum belly woman. She might sink.
Okay, now.
She might sink.
Blind her arsehole and hope for the best.
Right? All right, y'all. You want to do your outro, Manly?
Yeah, man. Just no simping. Stay true to yourself. Be free.
Definitely, I agree 100%. Y'all be blessed. Have a good one, and feel free to drop any requests in my comment section or my email, and I'll be happy to do them, or send it to me in Discord. I'll be happy to do it. I'll be happy to do a video on anything, even if it goes against what I talk about. I'll be happy to do a video on it and tell you my honest opinion, and go from there. Y'all be blessed and have a good one. Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Adios. Oh my goodness.